We are back. That's not how I start a podcast. This is a new podcast. What's good internet? This is the last one.
Every time there's a new podcast, Austin.
We are back every time. Yeah, we are back. Yeah. That's a fun, it's not mine, but that's a fun intro to a podcast. We are back, just being like, we're back. Yeah. Hey, back again in your ears. That's how I feel about the podcast in my life. Mm-hmm. I'm Austin Walker, joining me again. Gita Jackson, Patrick Klepek, Rob Zachney, Ricardo Contreras. I'm moving fast because we only have 55 minutes of Patrick left. And then Patrick turns into a pumpkin.
Oh, yeah, other way around.
So does Gita. Like, it's the end of the year. It's all coming down.
I will pull up this
oh my God.
Nest camera. And then whenever
when it's go time, it's go time.
83 percentile on height and weight. Just a big baby. A big baby wakes up.
What a big baby.
The opposite of her sister, who was a tiny baby. But whenever that big baby wakes up.
That beautiful baby. That beautiful big potato of a baby. Yeah, my meeting's been pushed back to 1:15. So we've got 15 more minutes of Gita.
We may as well just hang out then and not even get to the topic at hand. We just have like the tree.
That's my favorite part of podcasting.
Yeah, just shooting the shit. Who cares about a topic?
Don't talk about the thing that you downloaded the episode. I love it when that happens.
It can be fun. It can be a nice time. You're just hanging out with your friends. They're talking about whatever they did this week, which is a good thing because I guess actually that is kind of the podcast you're about to listen to. This is our Waypoints of the Year podcast, in which we all bring something to talk about that was part of our life in the hell year of 2020. I feel like unlike our game of the year, there probably won't be as much overlap here, though there almost was. Who wants to kick it off with what they brought to the table? I feel like, Rob, do you also have a heart out at one?
No.
Okay, well then Patrick or Gita should go first.
Okay, yeah. So mine Waypoint of the Year is it's so funny that I picked this is that the Kingcast, which is a podcast hosted by Scott Wampler, formerly of the wonderful website Birth Movies Death, before that all crumbled earlier this year, and Eric Vespi, who, if you, like me, grew up on the internet in the 90s and read a lot of Ain't It Cool News back before it was revealed that the guy who runs that is a terrible, horrible person. Quint on Ain't It Cool News is Eric Vespi, who does a lot of freelance film writing and also co-hosts the Kingcast. Like in the beginning of this year, starting, I made a decision when our Elizabeth, our newest baby, was born, that I wasn't going to play games. I finished Final Fantasy VII because I wanted to do the spoiler cast. I played Gears Tactics because I needed some sort of outlet, and that proved to be like psychologically valuable. But I wanted to, lots of media just wasn't coming out. Like the whole media industry was just like, fuck, like how are we going to release things? And so that ecosystem was falling apart. And I'd made just like a personal choice. It's like, there's so many things that I have always wanted to watch that I haven't. And where do you grasp at in figuring that out? And the Kingcast launched, and I am a Stephen King fan, but what I've learned from the Kingcast is that so much of my Stephen King fandom is cultural osmosis versus actually having engaged with either the textual or cinematic work of Stephen King. Because what I came to realize was that constantly be like, I've seen Misery. Nope. I haven't actually. I could tell you all the major beats of Misery, but I haven't actually sat and watched that film. Like, I know that Stand By Me is a very important film, like for a lot of like boys that grew up of a certain age. I know that. I certainly saw that. No, I have not seen Stand By Me. And so the structure of Kingcast is each week there is a guest, maybe like a Mike Flanagan, a very prominent horror writer, director who does a lot of Stephen King adaptations, Kumail Nanjiani, like folks of various prominence, podcasters, who bring to the table a Stephen King work that means something to them. It has to be something personal that like this is either something they grew up on or they have a personal connection to. And they talk about both the book and cinematic version and how that ties into that person's like personal history with King. And so this gave me like this very cool roadmap to explore this part of my sort of like cultural, like personal fandom identity. And also just like, oh, each week, like here is the thing in front of me. Like I don't have the time to watch the books or even listen to the audiobooks, but I can watch the movies versions of a lot of this stuff. And I just found this to be like really satisfying and interesting and illuminating on like what you think you personally know, both about a work and even what you've seen like over the course of your lifetime. And it's been nice in the same way that we've talked about games to have like objectives and goals. It's cool to like every Friday, it's like, oh, like here's the new movie I'm going to watch this weekend. And then I've got a podcast to pair with it. And it has just brought me constant joy over the course of the year. And I think quite like the other, let's just shout, what's the other Stephen King podcast? I want to make sure we get it out here, even though I'm talking about a different one.
Absolutely.
Just King Things?
Just King Things.
Yes.
Just did their episode on The Stand, for instance.
On The Stand, yeah. This was almost my, Just King Things was almost my Waypoint of the year also, which would have made this a very easy Waypoints because we would have just had dueling King casts. Shout outs to in fact really quick, like the short version of my choosing this as my Waypoints would have actually just been the Range Touch Network more generally. I do a lot of listening to their podcast. They also have a great podcast called Game Study Buddies. This is Michael Lutz and Cameron Kunzelman. There's also Danny, who I've only seen in streams and their Mages and Murder Dads Baldur's Gate retrospective stuff. But for me, Cam and Michael's stuff in Game Study Buddies and then Just King Things has been so useful in keeping a part of my brain active that it has fallen apart this year because I don't have a commute to read on. My podcast listening is in the drain, like without walking around my neighborhood to go like just on a walk to go to a restaurant or to go to a store that now I'm just getting stuff delivered or whatever has taken so much of that away. And also obviously the commute into the office. And so having their voices there and also having them be just incredible cultural critics and smart academics on Game Study Buddies has been so useful in not making my brain turn into a raisin. They are much less the like, here's our personal story with this King thing. Their Just King Things podcast is very much like a beat by beat breakdown of the stories, of any sort of like the background history on the production of the book or of any sort of the adaptations that they talk about. And then is kind of a critical conversation about topics, form, theme, etc. They are fantastic and highly recommend them as well. No celebrity guests as of yet, but I really believe in their ability to get the director of a bunch of King books / movies. What is that dude's name who directed?
Flanagan.
Is that his name? Yeah.
Mike Flanagan. Yeah. Haunting on Hill House. He did, that was his original work on Netflix, but yeah, he did Dr. Sleep. And a bunch of other,
I believe in them. They can get them. Please make it work out. That would be a very fantastic conversation. But yeah, no, and I think for me, the thing that's interesting too is my relationship with King is different than you, or it's similar to yours in that it's a cultural osmosis thing. King's work is so core to contemporary American popular literature that partly through just film osmosis, but also just through like having friends who've told me about stuff that happens in it. Or that happened in The Stand that I wouldn't have known about because it's not in the adaptations.
Or Cujo, which was another one that I was like, I've seen Cujo. And then I watched it and I was like, I haven't seen Cujo. There is probably no more prominent writer like of our lifetimes and the lifetime before us than King. That doesn't mean he's the best, but or even the most important. But I don't know that there's been a writer that's had more wider pop culture influence than Stephen King, and that's been the realization of like listening to King Cast and I'm sure is similar on Just King Things is just the sweep of
it's just like
work.
Is this where this started? Is this where this like writers, cultural meme began in some cases? Do you know what I mean? Like
writers simply weren't famous in the way that Stephen King was famous before Stephen King became Stephen King. Almost everything this homie has written automatically gets optioned for a movie. There's like that just wasn't happening. This is a guy that set a certain kind of path for a writer. Like even if you don't like James Patterson, like this is what Stephen King has wrought. That is his impact on the culture. He's like essentially the Beatles creating the phenomenon of pop music.
But even there, you had like James Patterson was willing to sell anything on any dotted line and couldn't catch up with like King. Like he never never maintained the like King would like still maintained some literary cachet like pretty far along. There's still highs and lows in that catalog, and some of the adaptations
even when he was,
are
like doing like automatic writing on a bunch of fucking painkillers and writing Dreamcatcher and shit. He did care about like his own integrity and craft, and like actually we can tell reading his writing that he thinks of himself as a writer and not as a person who is doing some, like he likes the act of writing and wants to push himself to be a better writer, even if I think the things he likes about his writing are not the things I like about his writing.
I just really quick. I was like, how does he stack up? Biggest author of all time. I typed into Google. There's a list of best-selling fiction authors, but Google's automatic response was like, Roald Dahl, 6'6", George Orwell, 6'2", John Grisham, 6'1", John Steinbeck, 6 foot, Ernest Hemingway. Biggest ones of all time. Let's go. Comfortable with 6 foot even, baby.
Why does Roald Dahl, the largest popular author, not simply eat?
It's incredible. Shout outs to Google not knowing how people think. But no, yes. I think like one of the things also that's unique about this is going back to what you were saying is like King's work has been so much of King's work has been adapted, and so much.
Why
do
I like Lost?
Different.
Because Lost is actually just an adaptation of The Stand, with like
right.
with a different sort of like cast of characters and a slightly tweaked premise. Like it's so many of the things that the X-Files like deeply influenced by like Stephen King in like a serialized form.
Did the King cast talk about how The Stand itself is an adaptation of Lord of the Rings?
They haven't done The Stand. Yeah, they were.
Yeah. King sets out to write the American Lord of the Rings. One of his big things is from this most recent episode of Just King Things. One of his things was like, it's really hard to look at the maps of like these fantasy worlds. I should make one set in a map we already know. People already know where Vegas is. People already know where Oklahoma and Denver and all these places are. I can just map that in, and then it's just like once you start going down that path, like, oh, this guy is the Gandalf.
A bioweapons lab is Numenor.
Yes, sure, almost certainly, right? It's not a clean. It's not like it's in some places it's a 1-to-1 adaptation in terms of like, okay, this is a character pulled by evil but who has his own desires also, and in other cases it's very much the like, this is a character who is supposed to be the kind of like walking sociologist who understands all of the culture and who stands in for that part of who Gandalf is. This is the character who is very much the Saruman, who is like a living embodiment of evil or whatever. Anyway, I think that it is the ways in which those books and those stories hang over us, even if King isn't the most, the highest selling author of all time. I think there was an important distinction.
You might not like King, but you actually like King. You just don't. Yeah. You just don't know it because his influence has spread into so many other works in different ways that it's impossible to ignore because it's just everywhere.
And his genre space is huge. His genre space.
He did Stand By Me, right? Like my guess is there are people who like don't like horror, like saw Stand By Me or even a Misery, which is like more thriller than horror, right? Like is more adjacent and you could count that as one of their favorite works and not even realize that it's a King a piece of fiction, especially if you'd only watched like the cinematic adaptations by which Rob Reiner did both Misery and Stand By Me.
Right.
Do either of these podcasts get into why people were so excited for The Dark Tower and why nobody cares about The Dark Tower anymore?
Just King thinks
what is your argument that nobody cares about The Dark Tower?
Wow. I think the movie
really
want
Rob.
Shots motherfucking fired right now.
Should I read The Dark Tower? It's always been the one where I've been like, this seems sick as shit, but I hear it gets so bad that it's not worth going down the rabbit hole.
Well, one, I would say this is not a controversial take, but like I think it sticks the landing. King is famously bad at endings, and I think the ending to The Dark Tower is brilliant and it thematically fits everything it's really good. It is I would argue good enough that the last 3 books that he wrote after he almost died panicked and like wrote in a hurry, thus sort of like unwinding a lot of the good stuff that he did in the first 4 books. It's still worth it. The first 4 books are like some of my like most treasured like experiences like reading like period. And the characters, I think if you read the first 4 books, you'll understand why Dark Tower fans are like so fanatical about like that series. I also think it's unadaptable. Like it's just, I mean, that could be its own spin-off podcast on like why the Dark Tower doesn't work as like being adapted into other mediums, but it is certainly worth reading those first 4 books for sure. And at that point, you'll just be like, "Fuck it, I guess I'll read these other 3 to see how he wraps it up." Because there's a specific thing that happens in the 6th book that like has to be read to be believed. I won't.
No, don't spoil.
If you're gonna read it, I don't want to spoil.
Now
it.
I'm thinking about it.
There's a thing that happens that is just so audacious. And it's like, man, you fucking asshole.
Yeah.
Like, why? And he's apologized for it. He has apologized for all of it and said that if he wrote those books in a hurry, thinking that he finally, for a man that writes, you know, about death, had never really kind of reckoned with his own mortality. And then when he almost dies, gets off of drugs and alcohol, finished his actual Lord of the Rings, became the Dark Tower.
Right.
And he writes those books in a hurry, knows he fucked them up, wishes he could rewrite them.
I'm not convinced he won't, because he does that so many times. Like
he rewrites them in like
has 2 editions, right? The normal,
there's like 500
and
extra
edition.
pages in the uncut edition or something.
If he quite literally at one point just said, "I'm just going," the thing it.
My understanding, okay, I can explain it because I'm from the outside looking in. I mean, I can't spoil things. My understanding about the mythology of that world is such that there is space for things to fictionally change in a way that would be coherent or consistent with the metaphysical laws of that world and the places that it moves around in without necessarily being
without
out of place.
undoing anything in the original 7 books.
Correct. Yes. Okay.
Yep.
That's my understanding.
Mm-hmm. My brief one, my king thing, my thing with Stephen King, which I finally started reading it and was like definitely surprised by the sensitivity of the plotline about abuse, which was, I feel like, it's been fumbled in every film adaptation of it. But is
they just
very
ignore it or do it very
complex.
very poorly. Like the opening like of it chapter 2, and, you know, in the hate crime that occurs there is brutal in the book, but it's like it's so bad in the movie. Like
the backbone of the book is about, like, you understand immediately when you read about that hate crime that this is the backbone of the book. This is what Pennywise is. Pennywise is the hate that lurks in small towns, and it becomes the lens through which you read the entire book. And I read it, and I'm like, that book is so long, I'm not going to finish it anytime soon.
No,
but it is. I was like, wow, this is thrilling, and this is but that's one of the cases where I feel like Stephen King absolutely 100% understands the thing that he wrote, and he wrote it very intentionally, and you can see the work he did into building out these metaphors. Some of his work, especially the stuff where you can tell he's just on a lot of painkillers, I don't think he understands what he writes sometimes. I think the worst case example of that is The Shining, where he famously hated Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, and it's because he sees Jack as as himself. Obviously, he sees Jack as an alcoholic who's struggling with fatherhood, but wants fundamentally to be a good father. Whereas Stanley Kubrick saw that character and was like, this is an abusive man, and the horror story is that he finally gives in to his true nature. And like, I feel like that is a friction between him and his work that comes up a lot for me, where I'm reading shit, and I'm like, you put some shit in here that you didn't even know that you put in here, man. Like, this is kind of weird.
The last thing I'll leave, and we can then move on from King, is that like all this stuff that we're talking about in the Kingcast, they pointed out there was this interview where King talked about his writing process, and it explains just everything. Mm-hmm. Like if you're looking for like a key to unlock of like all his strengths and weaknesses as a storyteller, is he doesn't do outlines. He doesn't structure his books ahead of time. He just writes, and then at a certain point, the story is over.
That makes sense.
Which is, you know, I think is in, you know, his indication was not that he doesn't think ahead at all, but it's not as though he's got like an outline that he's following, like chapter. He just writes, and that explains so much of like why he's great at openings, great at middles, bad at endings.
It's hard.
It's why he's a better short story. You know, his short stories are tremendous because he can't get himself into trouble, whether that's endings or race or any other number of things that Stephen King gets himself into trouble over. But it's just that it's those fascinating tidbits that like it's cool to better understand like an icon of your own like identity, and like that's what the King cast has given me. It sounds like Just King Things has also done.
It totally has. I'm actually happy enough actually on saying that like that is having talked through it. It has been the thing that's been with me the whole time this year. I do want to give them that credit. So I'm gonna pivot and make that my waypoint of the year. We double king casts.
Ooh,
wow.
I will quickly shout out Lovecraft Country, which I was going to bring up. For similar reasons, which is like I started watching that show when it first came out, and then it fell off, and I came back into it in the fall, and then I fell off of it, and then I watched the final few episodes this week.
All-time great pilot,
but messy as hell in a way. It's interesting because I left it feeling like that's a show that starts by saying, you know, this is an imperfect. It starts by having a black character read a Lovecraft book, and someone basically saying like that book is extremely racist, and him being sort of like, you dance with the one who brought you. Like, yes, I love this thing because it's imperfect. I love this thing despite its imperfections. I love it like a person who, despite their imperfections, I find a way to connect to it, and I'm not, you know, blind to its imperfections and to its deep problems, but I have to find a way to integrate it into my life because it touches me in this other way. And then it's a story very much about people who are all bad people in many ways. The ways in which that they hurt each other and are deeply selfish throughout the story is fascinating. For the high level of it is like it's a 1960s kind of horror anthology in which each episode, despite having a continuous story, it takes huge genre shifts ranging from time travel stories to like alien adventures to an Indiana Jones or like National Treasure-ish episode where like you're doing lots of like puzzle solving in an ancient tomb, to more traditional haunted
show are
house stuff.
I
inside of the same episode even sometimes.
Yes.
And I think it fumbles a lot. I think that it like one
of the big criticisms of the show was the way that it handles queerness over time,
over and over again. There's like a two-spirit character who shows up, who is immediately disposed of for a very empty characterization reason that is like despicable. There is, I think, in general, even its use of black trauma often feels performative in the way in which it wants to pull from a catalog of historical black traumas, like the death of Emmett Till and the Tulsa massacre. But I also, there is part of me that also wants to engage with it and kept coming back to it this year because one, it does feel a kind to me to Watchmen, which came out last year and which I was also not extremely hot on compared to most folks, often for similar reasons, but partly because it feels like we're in the middle of a stylistic shift in which this is the second of 10 of these types of shows we're going to get over the next 10 to 15 years. And it's so fascinating to me to see this process by which, you know, talented filmmakers fumble the ball on their way to trying to make something really distinctive. Misha Green, who I think was the showrunner on this, does some really incredible stuff here. And I think in terms of playing in the anthology format, does stuff that is just like startlingly smart. And yet when she's telling other people's stories, she can't quite wrap her head around it. Or she's too quick to deploy, again, wounds and trauma in a way to get a dramatic, quick effect, and not necessarily in a way that ever feels like those folks are treated as an end to themselves. And so that is to me like one of the things that I have been so interested in, because this is an imperfect object that I'm nevertheless glad exists. Not because I don't think that the missteps are, you know, acceptable or something, but because it is a signpost on the road that we are on, a road in which a different group of creators is being given the keys to a budget that lets them and to the freedom to do genre like experiments like this. This is not like a straightforward show by any means. And it's gross as shit. Like they go some places like in terms of the visual gore and horror that is. I mean, it's an HBO show, so they can get away with it in a way.
Yeah, but even as someone that let's say revels in that stuff at times, the body horror,
the skin
sequences are really something else in this show, because it's when it tone shifts, it doesn't just like, you know, some shows or, you know, works like are like adjusting a dial. Like this one just has like two extremes. Like it's just like when it shifts, and like that's, I respected the big swings, and it feels like the weaknesses are just born out of the big swings, in which like there's just not enough time for a lot of different elements of the story and the characters to breathe. And it's almost as though the show tried to marginalize those weaknesses and turn them into a strength by just like, well, let's just turn the page over here.
Now we're over here. Now we're in outer space. Now we're in.
It almost
that episode
felt
is incredible.
Yeah, it almost felt like it was planned as a like completely disparate anthology, but then someone came in and was like, no, we have to put a story to go through it.
Well, it's an adaptation of a book that most of that stuff happens in.
Really?
Okay. Apparently is it's taking whole cloth, and when the first season ends, that's where the book ends. End of the book.
Yeah. Huh. So there is stuff that's not in the book. The Korea chapter just isn't in the book at all. But the like stuff with space is in the book. The stuff with the I believe the kind of haunted house episode is in the book. A lot of that stuff just comes, but the book is this kind of collection of pulp stories in a similar way.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think that's all I want to say about that. It's such a fascinating show, and I almost wish there was something in. So like, I guess it's worth saying the book is written by a white dude, right? And I think that Green does a good job of adapting that material with a more authentic voice. But I don't necessarily know that it can escape the ways in which Black trauma, marginalized trauma, were deployed in the original material, because there's almost there are times when it feels like it's treating things like an Easter egg. You realize, for instance, in one of the episodes that a bit character in an earlier episode was Emmett Till. You're like, oh shit, she's friends with Emmett Till. And I don't know that I ever want that relationship with Emmett Till, who is a boy who was like tragically and gruesomely killed for no reason by a group of bigots. And I can't pivot from the ways in which it goes to like great ends to try to, not to try to situate the violence that's happening in these people's lives, but to kind of leverage the context to then having a character try to make me upset about how bad the funeral smelled because it was such a hot day and people could smell his body. Cool. Those, you don't get to give me like yo, we stuck him into that Ouija board scene, and then also make me respond, you know, authentically to that, the way that stuff comes up. And yet I was wrapped to the end of that story and curious about his mythology.
Like, you want to watch a show in which like
fucking good. Yes.
The acting like elevates like weakened material. Like Journey Smollett is just like tremendous in this show. Like I've seen her in a couple of different things, but never like she gets to the whole thing here, and she is just like remarkable and I mean, a lot of the acting is really great, but she stuck out. But it's like, it is one of those shows where like with lesser actors and actresses,
it would be miserable.
This would have fallen apart pretty quickly. Yes. Like they're just really just punching up this material, especially when it's weaker, where they just grab you and you're like, I just want to see what these people do. I just
and it fully delivers on the initial story, the initial pitch from that premise, which is like, why can't we have a story of Black folks doing pulp adventures? And it does it, and everyone is a huge fucking nerd as characters in this show. Everyone has like some weird, and it's deeply touching when it wants to be. And I hope that we'll see what season 2 looks like if there is a season 2. But interesting thing worth talking about.
Make it to the space episode, if nothing else. Or watch it out of context.
Or watch it out of context. Actually, you can just jump in. It's fine.
Don't need the rest.
It's fucking wild.
It is just kind of remarkable that we're finally making it back to the place when we had the television space where we used to have like 6 or 7 different black sitcoms, you know? We're finally making it back to a space where like black people can just be in a television show. And that show doesn't have to be like the magnum opus of the black experience. It can just be a fun pulp show. I'm so glad. I think that there was some really kind of unfair and weird criticism of Lovecraft Country when it first came out because people were expecting a revelation of storytelling on the scale of Get Out, for instance. And it's not that. But that's absolutely fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
Well, Jordan Peele was involved in the show, which is part of the reason it got.
There is also there is one episode
that legacy comes with the good work that Peele's trying to do by elevating other.
There is one episode that has a fucking Peele tier, like horror slasher villain type duo that chases.
Oh my! Yes, there is a character that's basically
rules.
just like a reject from Us, and I mean that in the most positive way possible.
It's so good. Anyway, so yeah, that's I'm going to choose Just King things, but I did want to talk about Lovecraft Country at least a little bit in relation because I think like King's stories, it is a collection of genre performances and explorations, and it's at its best when it is playing in that space and letting the actors really sometimes chew the scenery in really overwrought ways that still manage to be affecting in that way that pulp stories can be. So, all right, who's up?
I'm up because I'm also gotta go.
Let's take a break and then let's take a break and then Gita will come back in on yours because of time constraints. So, BRB. All right, we're back. Gita.
Hello.
What is your waypoint of 2020?
Shocker, everybody. It's Gossip Girl.
2020
is that legal?
Hit.
Yeah.
Rob, we know what yours is. You can't do this.
Yeah, it's not in my handle. It's not in my handle. I don't go around being like, I don't end every show being like, yo, I'm Rob the Mentalist Zachney. No, that's not.
Let's go. Also, one more part. It just demon souls and the Mentalist.
You, Rob, that does not say the Mentalist when I look at you. I'm looking at you with your fucking glasses and your big bushy beard. I'm just like, that's the guy who watches the Mentalist, baby. I didn't know that.
God. Anyway, Gossip Girl.
Gossip Girl?
Okay, real quick. For the audience that doesn't know shit about Gossip Girl, what is Gossip Girl?
Okay.
Just like, give me the 3-line. Give me the elevator pitch.
Well, Gossip Girl.
Oh my God.
Fuck. Spoilers for this show that aired like 10 years ago.
Sure.
No, we're not bleeping out who Gossip Girl is.
Okay.
Kato, bleep it out.
This later. I do think it makes the show better to know that twist because it just speaks to the absurdity of this and creativity of this writer's team. But Gossip Girl is a show about the it's based on a series of young adult novels that I didn't read. And I actually didn't watch the show when I was in high school when it came out because I was like, boy, I shop at Hot Topic and I listen to hardcore punk. I'm too cool for Gossip Girl. Blah. I was wrong. I was exactly the target audience for Gossip Girl.
Back then.
Yeah. God, I was a fucking idiot when I was 16. If I could go back and punch myself in the face before I started smoking as a 16-year-old, I could. I swear to God. But it is about Serena van der Woodsen, the daughter of an extremely rich divorcee, and Blair Waldorf, the incredibly type A daughter of a rich fashion designer, and their sort of orbit of friends in New York in the Upper West Side. They go to school at St. Constance, and which is a fake prep school, and they date boys from the sisters of the sibling school that is also a prep school for boys. But Serena has come back from a summer, a year out of state trying to get over some kind of trauma. And she falls in love with Dan Humphreys, a young aspiring writer who lives in Gasp, Brooklyn. So when these books were written, New York was a little bit different from when the show was actually set. And where the New York that the show is set in is so rooted in the way that city was when I was 16 and when I first started mythologizing New York to myself. Like this is a time when, like, there's an episode where that just opens up with LCD sound system. You know, like it completely buys into the way that New York was producing culture at the time, which at that time, New York had this incredible indie rock scene with the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, the Strokes, LCD sound system. This is all documented in this incredible book, Meet Me in the Bathroom, which I just devoured. And there is something about this show that hits on that teenage experience so authentically that it becomes fascinating to watch. Like, you're seeing a mythologizing of a New York that now doesn't really exist anymore, right? Like Dan Humphreys lives in Williamsburg, and his dad owns a gallery on Bedford Avenue, and the show tries to tell you that this is a guy that doesn't have enough money to send his kid to Yale. You know, like that simply is not true anymore. like if you own property on Bedford Avenue, you are a billionaire. Like, that's it. But that's not just that. But as I'm rewatching this show, I'm rewatching it because my partner David has never seen it before, and what you start to understand is that this was they captured lightning in a bottle. They had this incredible combination of very, very charming and talented actors and in a wildly creative writing team that was willing to just do anything as long as it would be fun and funny. Like there's the current plot line we're at. Dan and Serena have broken up. They have an on-again, off-again thing. And they're broken up, and she's getting into this artist guy that had a solo exhibit at Dan's dad's gallery. And she's talking about it to Blair. And Blair is like, ugh, artists, you know, it all starts out great when they're in their blue period. But soon it'll get into cubism, and it'll be some other girl's eyes sticking out of her forehead.
God damn it.
An incredible line, and the way that Leighton Meester delivers it is perfect. Like, they realized suddenly that they had...
Mina has thoughts.
I love Gossip Girl.
Mina has very Blair Waldorf energy. I'm just going to put that out there.
Listen, I am, like, if there's anyone I relate to the most on that show, it's Blair Waldorf, an incredibly type A person who gets absolutely sicko mode when things don't go her way. Sorry. I know Rob also enjoys Gossip Girl because we are secretly the same person, but it's just, I get so enthusiastic about shows like this where you like the screwball comedy dialogue just, it is perfect. It's just perfect. Delivered perfectly every time.
So there's two things. One, I also didn't think I would like Gossip Girl as much as I did. But it turns out I just hadn't had the right depressive skid to get into the show.
Sure.
Where one night I was out in LA and I was like, I have no idea what sounds good, but I've got a couple pints of ice cream and Gossip Girl. Let's see what this is all about. I was riveted because it is this there's a fully going for it energy to that entire series that I enjoy and is there from the start. The other thing is that some of these characters and performances really are memorable. There is, like, Blair Waldorf is a fun character in the way that, like, Frasier remains a fun show in some ways. She is such a try-hard intellectual in some ways. And
her interviews at Yale are so perfect, where she knows she's perfect on paper, but she has no ability to charm them because she just never thought it would matter.
Right, and she's got that wonderful, like, she operates on the performance operates on these two levels of, like, one, there is the front that is Blair Waldorf, and then there is the growing panic as she's like, the mania is starting to show. The vindictive temper is starting to bust loose. And it's fun watching these beats go. Here's the thing I can't quite. Okay, so this show became dominated by its shipping camps in some ways, right? Like, this is
unlike most shows.
Oh yes, unusual for television.
This feels like kind of like a foundational text of like where shipping begins to dominate the discourse of a show. I don't know if that's maybe retconning the history of the show's life and culture?
At the time was such a phenomenon that I know Vulture had a dedicated feature for every single episode called the Gossip Girl to Reality Index, where they just judge different things they do and say and places they go to in Gossip Girl based on how true to life to New York they are, or how clever enough of a commentary they are about living in New York. Like that was the level we were at, where like once a week you'd get together and talk about, oh, can you believe that they referenced that weird New York thing on Gossip Girl this week? Everybody was doing this. Yeah,
it seems like it was building on I'd have to look up the dates, but it feels like it was what Sex and the City was for like an older generation was to ours. But here's the thing I can never quite forgive. I will never like Chuck Bass, and furthermore, you will never convince me that the relationship that built up between Dan Humphrey and Blair Waldorf was not the like correct arc for those characters, that then they kind of pull the emergency brake and whip the show into a series of a series of really disastrous marriage knots that like kind of taints the show. And I think it goes back to Chuck Bass at the start in the pilot is represented as like an uber creep who commits multiple sexual assaults in the space of like 20 minutes.
Yeah, he like tries to sexually assault Jenny Humphrey, a major character on the show. And like the rest of the characters later on that season, they got to be like, well, okay, because they realize like Meester and Chuck have like they have incredible chemistry and they want to explore that. And like it's the same problem as Logan and Veronica Mars, right? Where in the first season he's hosting bum fights, this guy's irredeemable. And the next season's, as he becomes a love interest for Veronica, the realm of bad boyness that he can operate within becomes smaller and smaller and smaller because they have to make sure that you like him.
Well, and the solution becomes very similar too, where it's like, okay, well, how do we forgive this guy? What if we give him a really bad dad? And what if his dad's
is a nightmare, man?
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. But like it is truly like, man, like how do you build sympathy for Chuck? Well, his his dad is the Genghis Khan of the Lower East Side. So
there's this great scene I just watched. Yeah, I mean, you're right in that doesn't excuse any of the things that he does, and it doesn't excuse the way he treats women, especially the way he talks about explicitly seeking out women who do not speak English to have sex with him. Him being a 17-year-old boy. Let's not forget. So the reason the show is called Gossip Girl, I didn't explain this part because it like this meta level is like it predicts the fucked up panopticon of the internet that we live in a way that is bizarre and remarkable, where they're in this show, these Upper West Siders are always surveilled by a website called Gossip Girl, which is what it does is just report on the goings on of various teenagers in New York. Essentially, it's like, oh, there's a Gossip Girl post about a party with a bunch of 15-year-olds at it.
Don't do that.
Don't do it.
Don't do that.
Like,
but
Serena and Dan will be out on a date and you'll see someone in the background take a picture and like later in the episode, that's going to show up on Gossip Girl. And this idea of like constantly being observed, like not having the barriers of being actually famous but experiencing a weird fucked up fame anyway, that is like a huge aspect of the show. And Gossip Girl is a character in the in-universe voiced by, speaking of Veronica Mars, Kristen Bell, just doing her most like devious like voice of all time.
God.
It looks like Lonely Boy got caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Or
is this gonna be a 3-way or D-Day?
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah.
Best line.
Oh, amazing.
So, but the thing is, that becomes the mystery of the show, which isn't the focus at the start, but it becomes like, who is Gossip Girl? Which is not a question I'm really interested in at the start of the series, nor do I think the series is interested in it.
Yeah, in the books they never reveal it, by the way. She's just a gossip blogger.
Yeah.
Like Crazy Days and Nights, basically.
And the series builds toward this reveal where it's like, we're going to find out who Gossip Girl is. And I guess it's similar to the show I'm going to be talking about. You kind of build this thing up where it's like, there's no character who's going to really answer. Like, they'll both make sense and also satisfy the omnipotence of this, or the omniscience of this character.
People were really hoping it would be Dorota, the wonderful character of that is a Blair's maid that is like the only adult that cares for the well-being of children in this show. All the other adults, the secret twist of Gossip Girl is that all the adults are way, way more ridiculous than the children, to the point that when Wallace Shawn, by the way, Wallace Shawn guest stars for several episodes in the show, and he plays against Leighton Meester, and just like he is the antithesis of everything that she is, and it's like a perfect rivalry. But he said in an interview that someone linked to me on Twitter that like, oh, the brilliance of Gossip Girl is like the way that the adults are portrayed. It seems like very true to life, to the point where I'll be acting in a scene, I'll be like, that seems familiar. Where did I see someone acting like that? Oh, yes, in reality.
Oh, I'm glad that you've gotten a chance to revisit it this year. I feel like we are all allowed in this year especially to return to the thing the things that have shaped us for comfort.
It's letting me see New York again too, is the other thing. Like it David and I, like, on the weekends when we spend time together, usually we plan like trips out into Manhattan to go to museum, go to Central Park, and actually see and experience the city. Like, that's something that we like about living in New York, and it's one of the reasons why we've stayed. When you have friends who've decided that living in New York when everyone's working from home is just not worth it to them. But it is worth it to me and him for this idea that we'll get to experience culture again. Like, the culture of New York is actually important to me, I've realized. And was watching them walk through Central Park, that sort of rainy, reunion scene between Blair and Serena in Central Park, or watching Jenny Humphrey go to some kind of random dive bar in Williamsburg, and the photography that's like in the style of the Cobra Snake just reminds me of what I found so incredible about New York when I was like underage, like going to underage drinking with my friends in on St. Mark's when I was visiting, friends from summer camp and stuff. Like that is something that's priceless for me right now, because I can't see any of these things, even though I'm here. Like, I would love to go and sit on the steps of Met. I would have lunch there. I would love to do that. And I will have to settle for watching Blair and Serena do it. And I hope by the time I can sit on the steps of the Met, I will have as many fabulous headbands as she does.
That's a good goal to have.
Thank you.
All right. Do you want to roll into the next one? Rob, Ricardo. Also, I know Patrick and Gita, you are both on a time limit, so if you have to just duck out at some point, that is okay.
Yeah, sounds good.
Rob, Ricardo.
Okay.
Ricardo.
Okay, sure. I guess picking back up on the theme set out by Patrick's on podcasts that are about other media. This year I've started listening to Great Gundam Project. You've heard both me and Austin talk about it, like mention it multiple times on Waypoint Radio. Disclosure, I guess now Austin is on it.
I am on it now for like a few months. I'm doing this one show, this one series.
Yeah, which
no, Iron Blooded is in like 6 years, Rob.
Okay. This is the thing. This is the thing.
You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, the Great Gundam Project is watching every piece except I guess they skipped SD Gundams stuff.
No, they didn't.
They didn't. Okay,
they did that first SD run. I promise. Yeah, you'll get there if you're starting from the top.
I just recently, so I'll get to it. But like they started at the very first Gundam show, known colloquially as 0079, because it came out also in 1979, and that's also like the in universe year, right?
Also known colloquially as in universe, in universe it's Universal Century 0079.
Yeah.
Colloquially, I love that we call it First Gundam. That's just the fandom also calls it. First Gundam.
Right. And they've taken on watching 2 episodes a week and just talking just about those 2 episodes, and like they mention multiple times they don't watch ahead. One of the guests, I also should mention actually, M at M Being, I think
it's M_Being on Twitter, and then Head Falls Off Jackson.
Are the hosts, and they yeah, they've taken on this monumental task of watching fucking all of Gundam, which just really kind of like I've enjoyed bits and pieces of Gundam throughout my life. Like I was probably too young to really understand what was happening in Wing the first time it aired in the US, but I still liked the robots, and I had like poorly pieced together Gunpla from the time before I even knew what it was. Like my mother was like, "Oh yeah, he likes that show," and saw like a Gunpla in a store, and it turned out she thought it was just like an action figure, and then I got it and it was like, you know, all in pieces and shit, and I had to rip it out with I just like twisted it out with my hands. But like so like a lot of my exposure to it had only been through what was available like on TV. Like I never got into it. By the time I could even consider like purchasing things with my own money, like I had already kind of passed the phase where I was looking into like buying anime DVDs and things like that. So my experience of it was very limited, but I always kind of enjoyed revisiting the one show that I really liked, which was Eighth MS Team, which they hit this year. But what was really fascinating about the kind of long view that they've taken is I feel like there are few. I mean, there's a couple other, but there are few franchises that have such a kind of long history that I think. Like the other thing I can think of is obviously like Star Wars, but even Star Wars, the way that it changes is not like, I feel like something about Gundam has this kind of like force from first Gundam through like so many of the different series that first Gundam is almost like, what if, you know how J.J. Abrams made A New Hope again?
Yeah. But what if it was not a sequel? Right. Because the thing that happens in Gundam is, I mean, there are a bunch of AUs, right? And so what ends up happening is a bunch of different creators kind of swoop in and do their own. Sometimes it's stuff that takes place in that same universe, but it's often stuff that takes place in its own universe that reinterrogates some core idea from the original.
It's like an anthology of enormous novels.
Yeah,
totally. Right. So like. We just started Gundam X, which is one that like no one in the West really watches. It never got a dub. It's the only non-UC show to. That's not true, but it only just recently got released here. And
like just on Blu-rays too, like not on streaming anywhere.
A couple years ago, just on Blu-rays. Yeah. And the premise for that show is what if at the end of First Gundam things went bad instead, and all of the giant space stations that orbit Earth fell onto Earth and turned it into a post-apocalyptic wasteland, which is also kind of a kind of different version of some of the stuff that happens later in the main Gundam timeline. Kind of just like, what if the antagonist for much of that series had won at the end and done the thing that he'd set out to do, sort of. I'm being very general here.
Yeah.
And having a different creator come in to kind of play in that space, to Kato's point, is like so fascinating.
Yeah.
And it's different because like Star Wars didn't mean to do that. I guess now retrospectively, because of the Legends canon, it's happened. But like we don't have IP in that way where people come in and reinvent it over and over again and don't have to pay lip service to the past. Right.
And what's really interesting is just how well M and Jackson both kind of pull on, and I think continually remember to like it was easy enough for me to jump on at Wing, which is so far into the like they've been doing this for what 2.5, 3 years now. I forget the exact timing.
That sounds right.
Like every week, right? Like I'm jumping in kind of in the middle, but they bring with them obviously this experience of having watched from the beginning, the whole like all of the other shows, and they do a really good job of kind of leaning on that expertise at this point. That even if you're like if you like a lot of people, I feel like probably saw and jumped on at Wing because that was like one of the first ones that came out here in the States on TV, right? And I think they actually are really, really smart about both understanding that it was the first show for a lot of people and being able to weave the kind of like, well, these are the like, here are the things that if this was the one and only Gundam that you've watched, these are the callbacks and this is why this is important. And like, it's just shown a whole new light, obviously, on how I understood what Gundam as a franchise is and like what the types of kind of themes that it's really like going after, like kind of almost throughout all, like, and obviously to different degrees, right? Like certain series tackle certain things better or worse, but it feels it's kind of wild to just kind of see how kind of committed people making Gundam are to a kind of core set of ideas. And, you know, just like having this document of someone doing the work of going through all of it is really like shout outs to them for even taking it on in the first place. But it also it's inspiring almost to think about doing something for that long. Just like the thought of thinking like, oh, I will be doing this again, like continually for like the next decade or something is a staggering, like monumentally terrifying thing. But like seeing them kind of work through this and like understanding that, you know, slow progress is still progress. You know, it's like on that level helped me kind of get through this year of just like, it's okay if it doesn't feel like you're doing anything right now. As long as you're doing small bits, right? Like it feels like I'm not making as much forward progress as I would like to in my life almost, but it's okay to go at a slower pace than you're used to, especially during a fucking pandemic. And something about
it's also just nice to have conversations about like what you're interested in, which is like where like pop culture is sort of like paused in 2020 in a lot of ways, but also pop culture conversations are always about what the new thing is.
Right.
Like and if you're not, oftentimes you're watching things because, well, that's what your friends are watching. And it's nice to have conversations with your friends. And so the way you do that is you sign up for the new streaming service and you watch the thing and maybe you're just kind of into it. But like the Kingcast was the same thing for me. It's like, yeah, like fucking, I do want to watch like every shitty Stephen King adaptation, but like, why would I do? Why would I do that? Like, I have no, you know, maybe one night we'll sit around and it's like, you want to watch like Misery? Like, it's just on HBO Max. Like, okay, but like to have it, whereas the Kingcast, they're going to talk about every Stephen King adaptation, like from start to finish, and just keep doing that. And there'll always be new King movies, and there will always be new Gundam shows. Like, it's just cool. Like, this is like, yes, I've always wanted to do this, and this gives me a reason to do it. And now there are familiar voices that I can listen to every week talking about the thing that I'm into. That gives me the same sort of like feeling I get when we all do a podcast and talk about new games that are coming out. But it's like, yo, but the real grimy shit I want to talk about is like like Maximum Overdrive, like the movie that Stephen King directed that he doesn't remember doing because he was so high on drugs. And maybe David Lynch directed the best sequence of the movie because he was directing Blue Velvet at the time and he shared a producer with those two movies. And I want to hear people talk about that for 45 fucking minutes. And
feels
like
good.
That rules.
Let me to build on that, two quick things. One is Great Gundam Project is a $1 on Patreon.
Yeah.
Like that's an interesting model. It is you know, their base podcast is Abnormal Mapping, which is a game club. Again, they're not doing recent games for the most part. They do old games, and that is another way of like trying to keep up with their release schedule. I'm going to talk about the shit I really want to talk about, which I think their next game is Suikoden, so that's exciting.
A very active franchise.
A very active. Well, isn't there some sort of Suikoden, like that team is getting together to do something else? Anyway,
I believe they did a Kickstarter, right?
I believe they did.
I think that is actually true.
But the other half of this, the other thing I wanted to say is like, there is inside of that, you know, adjacent to Abnormal Mapping and Great Gundam Project, there are a bunch of other podcasts by friends of that show, like Export Audio, or there is why am I blanking on the name? There's another mecha podcast that is literally just like 20 minutes of listening to people talk about a specific mech. It's just like, hey, let's talk about this one mech, right? And inside of not just the Abnormal Mapping Network, but like across that fandom are a bunch of people making shows for each other. And obviously I think if you look at the network of people we know who make podcasts, that you can draw similar lines there. But I want to just like recommend that people try this, not because I think everything should be content and should be, consumable for each other or something. But because sometimes it's nice to have an excuse to go through something and have a conversation about a movie or about a book or about whatever it is. And
it's why I do a horror podcast with my wife. Nobody listens to it. I mean, like a couple thousand people listen to it because they're fans of me, but like I don't do it for them.
You're not making money on that podcast.
I'm glad you enjoy it.
Yes, right. But also,
I do that because I want an excuse to have us.
I do want to say you can make it just for your friends. You can make it for the 50 people who are going to listen, and they will like it because they want to hear your voice and they want to be there for like when you have a funny idea about a Stephen King book. Not that I think Just King thinks it's only for 50 people. It's successful. They have a Patreon. It's going well. But you know what I mean? Like that style of like I want some creation does not necessarily mean creation for a marketplace or creation for trying to make it in the podcast industry. I think there is a lot of value in just like, hey, let's have a conversation and record it. That would be fun. It'll keep us on track, and we're going to put it out there, and we'll see who listens to it. But mostly, our 100 friends from that Discord server we're in might listen to it, and that would be fun. And like, I definitely think that's a space that people should explore, whether they like it or or not. It's not super dissimilar to writing poetry or writing fanfic or writing stuff that is like, this is not about being marketable. It's about having fun and producing stuff for our community to enjoy together. And that can be, that is an aspect of this stuff that I think is it's fairly affordable to get a microphone now. You don't need a big expensive setup. You can get a $30 USB mic and do a podcast recording using free software on your computer. And that's kind of where we're at now. And I super, super, super just want to recommend that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All of this to say also to definitely want to mention just that they're apart from like the kind of structural, just like inspiring way that I fell into this show, like I do think Em and Jackson have very kind of sharp critique of the media that they're consuming. I think basically you should go listen to any of the podcasts that Austin just mentioned, that they're also on, like Abnormal Mapping, or I think
Repertory Screenings, which is a film podcast that they do. Yeah, they're fantastic.
They're great. But yeah, that's been my year catching up with Gundam.
Thank you for joining the Gundam fandom, Kato. We're thrilled to have you. Very excited for what's coming up in the future of this show. We're about to get into one of my favorite series. So after this one,
right?
But
yeah, excited.
All right. On that note, I am going to dip out. But lovely. I really wish I could be here to hear about The Mentalist. Rob, why don't you just talk to me about The Mentalist personally later?
I will make the case.
Thank you.
Rob will make, as Austin suggested,
a separate
personal podcast that is just for Gita.
Please. All right. See you guys later. Bye.
Bye. Have a good holiday.
You too.
All right. So now I got no place to be until I have my year-end meeting at 2.
Mods aren't looking.
Yeah.
The Mentalist logs on.
Yeah, Patrick's got to go away too at some point.
I'm leaving in minutes. I want to hear the initial pitch, and then I'll let you.
All right, then I will just get into it.
Yeah.
But it's so tough to talk about The Mentalist because it contains multitudes.
It really does.
I can give you a pitch, Patrick, but I can't really, in the few minutes you have to spend with us, I don't think I can do justice to the sweep, the grandeur that is The Mentalist. Now, you might be thinking, Rob, come on. The Mentalist is a CBS procedural that people's parents watched. That's not how can you bring that to the table? What case can you possibly make for it? And Patrick, I was once like you. And if you're thinking about getting into The Mentalist and you're thinking, well, when will I get it? It is one of those slow burn things where you might not get it for 12 hours into the series. You might just have to wait through
classic Final Fantasy, what was that, 13?
13.
We got to get 45 hours in, and then suddenly it gets good.
Yeah.
But I think the series started to pay off for me, well before then. So to give you the setup and Well, the setup for the setup is that I think two years ago, Austin made the case for this show on this podcast. And I was like, that sounds like bullshit. Like, Austin, I like no way is that show good. And Austin made a case, and I was like, cool, I'll watch that never. But it turns out that like sometimes you just need the disposable candy, and that's how I got into The Mentalist. So I could just throw on while I had lunch and not think about. And it turns out like it does develop into quite a bit more than that. And here's the weird thing. I would argue it's mediocrity at the start. It's sheer averageness as a CBS like case of the week procedural is what enables it to become a great show. Like, I think it is only able to pull off some of its tricks because you would never see it coming the way you would on like True Detective wants so hard to be a prestigious piece of television. It wants so hard to be like a sophisticated and insightful piece of detective fiction about America that, like, to a degree, any twist it throws at you, you're kind of like, I could feel that one coming. The Mentalist, things come out of nowhere on The Mentalist, and that's what makes it cool. So the setup at the start is that this FBI consultant, CBI consultant, Patrick Jane.
Excuse me?
Yes, they even make a joke out of this. They're members of the California Bureau of Investigation. The California equivalent of the FBI. Turns out a real organization.
Oh, I was gonna say, is this like is part of the surprise? It is later revealed that in like the meta narrative, the world building of The Mentalist, like we have split into a civil war has occurred, and California has had to establish its own bureau.
To a degree, this is very much about like an alternate history of California, or at least one with the names changed. But yes, this thing becomes very much about like California history and California mythology. But it opens on this dude, Patrick Jane, played by Simon Baker, is an ex-con artist psychic who basically he sort of gave in to hubris. Like, his con was so successful that he was moving into sort of a TV psychic role. Like, he was a guy who would like have his own show. He would appear on cable and do like psychic readings, and it would
really high on his own supply at this point. I want it to be revealed 6 seasons in that he actually is a latent psychic and has to grapple with the fact that he can read people's minds.
He's like a John Edwards, right? Like, he's not the politician, the psychic one, right? Was that his name? Was that guy's name John Edwards?
I can't remember. I can't remember. I know who you're talking about. I cannot remember his name.
Big forehead, John Edward. Apparently, just Edward.
Okay.
Way more charisma than John Edwards, though.
Yeah. And so he, like, at his height, apparently decided to involve himself in a police investigation of this long-running series of, like, psychosexual murders committed by this serial killer, Red John. And he decides he's going to wade in there and involve himself in the investigation, in part just to inflate his own notoriety. And he makes some statements about Red John. He does a reading, and he sort of says basically he can read what sort of person Red John is. He knows he knows him, but he doesn't know him. And Red John kills his family, and this all happens before the series opens. But that sort of redirects his life, and his quest becomes finding Red John. And part of that is he becomes a consultant using his skills as a cold read psychic to solve crimes for the CBI. And it's a total, like, you've seen a million shows like this. He's a guy with, ridiculous abilities. He is paired with a tough, no-nonsense partner who is like very much the Scully to his Fox Mulder.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's right.
At the end, he sort of breaks all the rules, and her job is to disapprove but put up with it.
Corral
See a million shows
into being
like this.
a useful, yeah. Uh-huh.
So here's where I think it starts to change. First, in the thing that got me in the first season is that this is actually a profoundly bleak show. And you don't notice it at first because Simon Baker is such a engaging performer, and he plays Patrick Jane as a very sort of high-spirited, almost childish prankster in some ways. But the first season, there's kind of two things looming over this. One is that he is a cold read con artist, and what that has taught him is that people are terrible, and not in the exhausting like House MD misanthropy way, but like Patrick Jane's character is someone who his worst expectations for people will always be confirmed. His belief about like how somebody might secretly be shitty is inevitably correct and true, and he just sort of goes through life knowing that no matter how people seem to be, there's rot underneath it that he can see. And that is who they are at their base. The other thing hanging over this is he's trying to work out whether or not he's on a quest for revenge or justice, or if those are the same things. And there's kind of a moral jeopardy with Patrick Jane's character of, you know, if he finds this guy, like, is he just going to murder Red John? Is he and what is he willing to set up that revenge? What is he willing to sacrifice? Who is he willing to screw over in order to get it? And a lot of the early seasons hinge on this question of like him examining the issue of revenge and the justifications murderers offer for violently righting the slights they think were done to them. And he it's a tough balancing act. Simon Baker plays Patrick Jane as a guy you could see convincingly as legitimately going either way. Legitimately saying, I want to move on with my life. I want to have a life. Or you could see him as becoming kind of like Hugh Jackman in The Prestige in some ways, right? We're just totally consumed, totally like maniacally focused on this quest for vengeance to the point where there'll be nothing left of him at the end. And I would say early in the series, like, it gets these themes out, and I ended up being pretty bought in to this character and his moral arc. That's the opening pitch of the show. The other thing that I think it unfolds into later, Patrick, is that it starts to see it starts out as like every case of the week is just its own isolated thing.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
It is building a mythology of its world. Like, everything is connected, and like 4 seasons in, you'll start to realize like, oh fuck, like all those throwaway cases, all those little guest spots, they're all coming back into play. And now that like there's this entire fictional California that this series has built, one county at a time, that is all being brought in for the end game.
And even like, so I guess like the way to talk about that specifically, there's 2 things there. One is like, it's a cool neo-noir where one of my favorite things that happens in detective fiction is the interplay between different layers of kind of institutions. There's the local, there's like the cop, the local beat cop or the sheriff. There's the highway patrol. There's the state like investigators. There's the feds, and the way that those levels all interact with each other is interesting. The fact that the show fills each of those roles with recurring characters is interesting, because you'll go like a season and you're like, wait a second, I know this guy. Where did this guy come from? Or the same way that it interacts with other institutions. Like, there is a very clear Scientology stand-in in this show that is run by, God, what is the actor's name? Why am I blanking on his name? Malcolm McDowell, who is fantastic in the role of this, like, is he a cult leader? Is he a corrupt businessman? Does he believe his own hype? What's going on there? But the other thing that the show does, and that I think separates it from a lot of TV procedurals, is that overarching story of Red John, this serial killer. You never know if you're watching a Red John episode or not. Every episode could tie into the big mystery, because the big mystery is abstract enough or is general enough that you don't necessarily need it to be a very special episode. You don't know when suddenly someone is going to turn the corner and like, oh shit, is this motherfucker Red John like toying with our protagonist? Or is this going to produce some sort of evidence that's going to long-term connect to the case? Or is this body that we found secretly going to be another victim? And because every episode can end and wrap up the way a TV procedural has to, where the case of the week is closed, but because and yet at the same time address that bigger investigation, it ends up walking the line between episodic and serialized storytelling so well, in a way that I don't think any other, primetime network drama has done for me. And I've watched plenty of schlocky bad cop shows. I've watched plenty of CSI. I've watched, my fair share of Law and Order and the various Law and Orders, and none of them get there. And also, I don't give a fuck about any of those characters the way I end up caring about the leads here, who are all so well acted. I don't know. Like, Rob, you and I have talked about this show a lot this year. In fact, I guess we started last year when I had been recommending you watch this show for years. I've been saying, you know what, Rob, I think you might really like this show. A friend and I watched it years ago. It's like super important to me for very sentimental reasons. It is a funny, weird show to care about because it is a cop procedural. Now it's a cop procedural that I think fundamentally distrusts the institutions of power because it sees them shot through with corruption and personal interest. I don't think that it's a particularly critical or it's not like a secret leftist show. It's not like a takedown of the police, but it is one that distrusts power. It distrusts the sort of centralization of power and the ways in which institutions become ossified in their structures, such that they can do harm to people and cover up harm that's being done. All of that filtered through this kind of neo-noir California, sun-soaked, sun-scorched in some cases, storytelling is just, it's a phenomenal show that never got the audience I think it deserved, because the audience it was being served to was not, I don't know, maybe it's unfair to say they weren't engaging with it in this way, but I didn't at the time hear that from the CBS audience, that oh wow, The Mentalist is really something special. And from our age group, what I got again and again was it's just biting Psych. And Psych is such a different show, despite being similar in the premise of there being a detective who is a fake psychic, right? It's a comedy, and it has its kind of dramatic beats, but it's so fundamentally different. And The Mentalist has always just been more my speed. Maybe that's because I'm an old man at heart, but I think it's playing in a playground that I really love.
Yeah, this is a show that can find such incredible gears when it wants to. There's an episode. It's not a hard clip to find. It's a clip that I think sometimes just makes the rounds because it resonated with a lot of people. But in the early seasons, there's a coroner who Jane just relentlessly gives shit to. And just is an asshole to him in the way that Jane is an asshole to everybody. And there's an episode where real early on, he sort of susses out that this character has terminal cancer and is at the precipice before the nosedive really happens. This is a guy who's probably living his last good days. And over the course of this one case, they completely changed their relationship between these two characters, but in a way that feels utterly organic, and gets these two characters who, one, you didn't know well at all, and two, you've just never seen this side of, reckon seriously with the inevitability of death and how you extend compassion to another person. And it's it comes out of nowhere when you encounter this, but this is kind of what the show can pull off. And it culminates in the case is solved. And you just see these two characters, almost there's a short play almost at the end of this episode, as this one character is asking for assistance, ending his own life on his terms, and whether or not Jane is going to help with that. And the fact that these moments land so consistently, that it turns out that Simon Baker has this not just range as a performer, but that Jane is written in such a way that he's this sort of protean figure where he can become different people if his sensibilities or sympathies are engaged. in a different way that sort of cracks through his armor. And it's always in a way that's convincing, because it doesn't happen that often. This is not a show that goes the well of, Jane, he's just a big softy at heart.
Yeah.
I watched, 6 seasons of the show. I'm about to finish it. I think this guy still might be a prick in a lot of ways.
But again, not in a way that I think is clearly mappable to the Sherlock Holmes. I mean, like it's mappable because the children of Sherlock Holmes are vast in many. But it does. I think again, separating him from like House is an important distinction.
Yes.
It is not simply that he puts on this sharp exterior. It's that he may really believe there is nothing underneath it all. Part of being a pretend psychic is for him having a direct connection to reality in a way that makes him seem to believe that it's all performance all the time from everyone, including him, that there is no, true nature of it all. And then kind of luxuriating in that because of the way it frees him up to make decisions that are often very hedonistic, despite his overarching belief in, the value of humanity or something, right? But that his interest in humanity is selfish. It's that he happens to like people. It's that he happens to be entertained by people. I don't think it's because he believes in some, like, at the end of the day, human life is fundamentally, truly valuable. It's that he believes nothing is, except for what we decide to give value to, and he's decided that, like, his relationships are important and that people shouldn't be allowed to intervene in such a way to remove the joy of others, except for in cases when it's him making that decision, right? I without getting into specifics, the climax of this show does not come in the final season. It comes in the penultimate season. It happens quickly and shockingly, and it's played in a way that I could not have predicted, because it has been the question of, like, what happens when he meets Red John is something that hangs over the entire series, to the degree that I think, Rob, you messaged me months ago and, like, how could they ever stick this landing?
Yeah, I mean,
and yeah,
the other thing, because, and like, I am convinced, you will never convince me they did not write themselves into a trap. Like, you will never convince me they did not sit down and realize we fucked ourselves, because the Red John monster they create is omnipotent in a way that I can't, I think I texted you repeatedly, Austin. I was like, I don't think they can. There's no one. You could resurrect Orson Welles himself to do the Harry Lime thing and be like, I will be Red John. Nobody was going to sell that. And
part of the reason is they already did that and not wasted it, but it ends up being a beat on the path, not being the real guy.
They already played against expectations once, where it's like, well, you would never, like, where he's so pedestrian that, you would never buy him as this. They play that card. And so that's out of the deck.
That's the Bradley Whitford episode, which is fantastic.
Oh, and such a good run up to it.
What a yes. I'm sure we've already talked about Bradley Whitford on the Sorkin cast that I missed. I'm sure Whitford came up once already, but let me tell you,
just a master of being a prick.
Yeah, 100%. Great sequence.
But so I was like, I don't think they can stick this landing. I don't see any way that they can ever really pull this off. And what's kind of shocking is they begin to figure out some conceits that make the character, like, to give you a little taste. Red John at one point traumatizes a character so badly, she experiences a dissociative break that basically, like, severs her connection with reality unless she's under hypnosis, at which point it's like you see the real person, but she's speaking to you beyond the grave. She's alive, but she's dead. Like, Red John can do that. And I'm like, okay, come the fuck on. Like, no. Like, there's no way he's this kind of, like incredible Svengali character who's like, I'm going to make you totally twisted. It will.
He can jokerify anyone.
He has to be stopped. And we have to stop him before he jokerfies again.
But the real question is, how could anybody have this kind of power? How can anybody have this kind of information at their fingertips to get inside anybody's head? And the show finds really satisfying answers for that. And the other part of it is, Austin, you mentioned it doesn't build, the end of the show is not the end of this arc. And I think this is the other thing. You stumble into the end game between Jane and Red John in much the way that Red John and Jane stumble into each other in various episodes, where the hunt is kind of stuck in neutral for a while. There's a lot of dead ends, false leads. And then suddenly there's just, to borrow a Holmesism, like the game is afoot. Like they are closing in. The number of people it could be begins to drop precipitously, and suddenly it's like, no, it's got to be like, we have a list of suspects now, which we never had before, and the show just accelerates, and it doesn't respect the need to resolve this in the series finale. The moment has arrived, and this show, unlike so many others, has the wit to realize you just have to go now. Like you'll wrap the show up some other time. This arc's moment has arrived, and it just goes for it. And
it's like the opposite of the Laura Palmer reveal, the Laura Palmer's killer reveal in Twin Peaks season 2, where that show suffers so greatly from that arc ending when it does. And I'm not saying that the final episodes of The Mentalist are as strong as what came before, but it understood where the energy was at in the room, and that you have to hit your closing material now, and the rest of it can be denouement, and that's fine. Like, but it is climax time. It is time to pull the trigger on this and to step forward and pull, put all the cards on the table, let the hand play out, and ride that energy. And it does such a fucking good job of it. I truly recommend it. I think it's streaming some places, right?
It's still on Amazon Prime. So if you have a Prime membership and are compromised in that way, the way so many of us are, because it's convenient and almost unavoidable. Hey, free Mentalist. I also would be remiss if I didn't shout out, like, the casting in the show is incredible. The guest actors they rotate through here is just like an all-star run of character actors from TV. Yeah. Everybody, the guests, all the guests from all the bit players in Justified cycle through here at some point. Like there's just a season where they're like, well, we're working with the Justified casting agent, so we'll just go through that. But I think that also is doubly true of the supporting cast. In particular, there's a detective that I think Austin, you and I both have kind of a crush on. Of like, I'd watch a show about this dude. Tim Kang's Agent Cho.
Yeah, Cho is so good. Tim Kang just absolutely crushes it. Cho is, man, he is just, I think the closest character in games is Kim Kutsuragi from Disco Elysium. Just like the greatest deadpan, just it is hard to oversell how effective he is at being the character who is supposed to be dry, and yet giving you a little bit more than just the straight man in a scene. He is hilarious. He like is the only other actor I think in the show who can kind of stand in a scene with Simon Baker and not feel overshadowed by his presence. And the two of them bounce off of each other so well. They're not even they're not partners in the cop sense. They're just part of the same team. But anytime the two of them are able to bounce off of each other brings an episode up so much. Yeah.
Kang's an incredible performance, and Robin Tunney's Teresa Lisbon is a role that is often thankless.
She's great too. Yes, absolutely.
And she manages to do great things with it. There is an art to being someone whose job is to have incredible and dynamic chemistry with somebody and to ground them and their actions in a sense of, because Jane is the danger with Jane is that, you know, Austin, you alluded to it. He's a character for whom there is no real, there is no true authentic self. There's no authentic emotional connection. There's just kind of amusement. That there has to be one character to convincingly break through that, and not just in a way that feels like, this is the love interest they needed to write in. The Mentalist doesn't play that love interest angle at all, if they can avoid it, for like 6 seasons. They allude to it, but that is not the primary lens through which this relationship is shot. So it needs to become one of, like, Teresa Lisbon is somebody who brings a lot of sincerity and warmth that Jane does not. And that interaction has to be interesting, and it has to cause conflict and challenge both characters and performers, and they bring that out in each other. This show, like, you know, I described it, you know, I think somebody wrote in ages ago that there's this entire genre of you know, boy genius and detective lady skeptic. Like that's a genre. I think if Robin Tunney doesn't bring the goods, and if Simon Baker doesn't handle the material well, this show would end up in that same neighborhood. And it doesn't, because they nail it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I hope people give it a shot, because there is a type of TV cop show that I think can be, especially, okay, so I guess where I want to start with this is, like, this is a show that aired from 2008 until 2015, right? This is an Obama era show and captures a lot of that period in time in its topics, in its hand. And I don't mean in a particularly critical way necessarily. I mean in the way in which, when you create culture can be a mirror, right, to the reality of its productions, and to a reality of the world and context that it's been made in. And I think that I was actually just talking about this with Emma Jackson over on the Great Gundam Project, because our backup show this season is Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex Second Gig, which is another fantastic cop show. Though that one, I think, revels more specifically in the ways in which the characters are caught up in being purveyors of state violence, in a way that is nevertheless, revealing of that relationship. But I think here in The Mentalist, there is such a snapshot of what it meant to live in the Obama era, and those sorts of stories we were comfortable telling, and the anxieties that rode just underneath them, right? Because it is a show that does not trust the police and yet can't see beyond them. Until this break happens, where suddenly briefly it does, without getting into too many specifics, but like the theme changes after the climax. The way the music hits at the beginning shifts a little bit. Where the camera is in the world shifts a little bit. We get this brief instance of being outside of the realm of California policing agencies. We see what life outside of the American state infrastructure could look like. And I guess without giving away too much, like, you get pulled back into it. The gravity is too great. And your life gets reshaped again around what you're told justice is supposed to look like. And I think that aspect of the show has made it stand up for me in a way that I didn't anticipate, because I was watching the final few seasons. The final 2 seasons, I want to say, maybe I watched as it was coming out, because it ends in 2015, and I was back in the States by the time I think it wrapped up. I wasn't, because it ended in February. I was about to move back to the States. And so yeah, like, there is a degree to which I feel like, despite not having very many episodes that are like, this week we're tackling, racial injustice, like, it's not that show. It nevertheless reflects, I think, a lot of what was front of mind in that era. And it does so with a bunch of actors who can play with that material, and who can play in that genre space in a way that I think has gone under-remarked on, given how adept they are at it. Great show.
Everyone should watch it.
Fantastic show.
And
I love that I've been able to relive it vicariously through you.
Dude, I'm so bummed that I only get to watch this for the first time once in some ways. Because it's been such a, like, I've loved keeping company with these characters. And I loved being surprised by, like, oh shit, we're going here. This is the destination. This is awesome. And the way that this show just sort of blindsided me in places. I don't believe in spoiler culture. And to a degree, I don't think we've spoiled. I do not think we've spoiled the show. But I think there's some things that this show, this I sort of let off with this, but I'll loop back to it. This show lies in wait, where you're like, this thing is just familiar and comfortable. It's not doing nothing. And then
did you know that Tim Kang was in Prey?
What?
Yeah, he's Morgan Yu. He's the male Morgan Yu voice.
Oh shit!
Wow. Yeah. Sorry.
They cast both the Yus so well in that game.
Yeah. Who is the femme Yu?
The guy who's I meant the brother.
Oh, the older brother. Yeah. Right. Yes. Yeah. That guy's a piece of shit. Love him. He's great. Fantastic.
Benedict Wong, right?
That's correct.
Always bringing the goods. Another reason bring back Deadly Class, you cowards. Give Benedict Wong his star turn that he deserves.
Anyway, great show. Glad you chose it as your waypoint. Listen, again, I said this earlier, but like the year that you turned into a Souls fan and a Mentalist fan is a great gift to me. It means a lot. It
means I'm suggestible, Austin.
It means a lot.
Yeah.
It has been, like I said, it truly has been a joy for me to share this stuff with you because it's exactly the sort of thing, which is like, no offense to the Gundam fans out there, but like Kato, you and I could have talked Gundam anytime and it wouldn't have surprised me that you would have liked Gundam, and I would have had other people. If you didn't like Gundam, I would have found other people to talk to about Gundam, right? It has a huge fandom. It's like you said, it's been around for 40 years. That produces a certain 50 years. Jesus Christ. 50, good God. 50 years. And because of that, it produces a certain amount of, wait, is that true? I'm wrong. Am I wrong? 1 second. Hold on. I was right the first time. 40 years. Yeah. 40 years. We're fine. I was like, wait a second, that can't be right. And so like to some degree that's already that aspect of the fandom is met. But The Mentalist is a show that I said, it means a lot to me, but that doesn't mean that I think that I can't post Mentalist memes on the internet and get a fucking response. Like if I go on to Google,
please start posting Mentalist memes that no one will get.
Exactly. Like I'm looking at these memes now, and I don't think that this shit doesn't land. This stuff doesn't land for a wide audience. It's unfortunately, but I will start posting these because this is what we're gonna do now.
Great. My face when spitefully making tea.
There you go. Yeah. Exactly. So Rob, I've really appreciated it. It's been very fun to watch you go on this journey. This is a good one. Someone says, how could you be so cold? And then Jane looks at the camera and smiles and says, by practicing. Good. Great.
That has a wide-reaching appeal, I think.
Oh, I love this show.
I hope so. He's just also extremely attractive and people are sleeping on it. So, I mean, that's the other half of this. It's kind of a heartbreaker is like, I don't know that anyone from this show has hit in the way that they deserve. It's such a TV show in a way we don't talk about TV shows anymore. This is not prestige television. No one here was launching their career into stardom. This is like a TV procedural with all of the baggage attached to it,
Gita and I were talking about, we watched that West Wing special on HBO, right. And it was just like, it struck us both how amazingly these actors were able to inhabit these characters again after more than a decade without playing them. But I think The Mentalist provides a similar sort of charm, like long form serialized television. Actors develop relationships with characters that you do not see in movies at all. But even these shorter run TV series, like there is something that becomes possible when you've watched, Simon Baker inhabit Patrick Jane for 60, 70 episodes, and you know this character so well that it allows shadings of the character, like levels of nuance become possible in a series like this that it's hard to describe, when you see it because you're watching a show and you're like, I just read this character in a way that I read a member of my family, like that other people wouldn't have picked up this flicker. But at this point, I've been watching this person play this character so long, and they are so in touch with this character that all these little reactions, all these little like stray thoughts and feelings about, the scene in front of them, all of that gets communicated in a way that I think tends to go by in shorter form films and series. And so I think this is some of the other, I think this is one of the other challenges for why this is so hard to appreciate. I think if you turn on a random episode of The Mentalist, you don't see what makes these performances so special. It is in the body of work that you realize, like, some of these performers never put a foot wrong and keep adding shades to their characters long after you could have said tools down, this is who this character is, we're done.
So I just looked into who was the showrunner on this and the person who developed the show, and I only just now seeing what else he's done. Brito Heller before this did Rome for HBO. And then after this, Rob did Gotham.
Oh no!
And then Pennyworth, the Alfred origin story show.
Wait, did that air?
Which
did Pennyworth happen?
That has apparently aired for at least a season. Season 2 is out now. Season 2 is out as we're talking. Wow. We'll be most of the way out by the time this
I'm
airs.
sorry, I did not like Gotham.
I bounced off. I
tried.
Hard. I know I have friends who really like it. I tried too. Apparently, this Pennyworth series is unrelated to Gotham somehow.
Huh.
Or at least that's what it says. Who knows, right?
I'll check it out.
But Pennyworth explores the early life of the titular Wayne family butler, Alfred Pennyworth, a former British SAS soldier who is forming his own security company in an alternate London, which combines aspects of London in the 1950s and 60s with invented events and practices, for example, televised public executions. Alfred becomes the target of the Raven Society, a group conspiring to take over the British government, and begins working against them alongside American agents of the No Name League, Thomas Wayne and Martha Kane, the future parents of Bruce Wayne / Batman.
I don't know about that.
You should watch that. You should watch that and tell me how that is.
Yeah, well, it's on Epic, so no.
Well.
Bodied. All right. On that note, we should wrap this up. Thank you all for joining us for this holiday festive bonanza. I almost said finanza. That's not a thing.
Festive finanza.
A festive finanza. Our own word. We've invented it.
Finanza is how you get a loan for your Lexus December to Remember clearance event. We're having finanza.
We're having... I hope everyone has had good holidays, has had safe holidays, has a good new year. We will be back in 2021, which don't believe the hype. I'm not ready for it to be good. I'm ready for it to be better, but like, 1/100th of 1 is more than 0. It doesn't mean it's good. You know what I mean? So we'll see how it goes. We'll be here with you all year. I hope. I don't know. I guess we can't make any promises. Shit. What's 2021 going to look like? I said 2020's got to be better than 2019.
What?
That's what I said. I was fucking wrong. So I'm not making any predictions anymore.
Fuck.
We'll do our best. We'll be there with you. To Patrick who left, to Gita who left. We're going to try. Exactly. Thank you for joining us, to Patrick and Gita who've now gone on to enjoy their holidays. And that's actually not true. I think it's meetings day for people who are working full-time at Vice still. I don't have to do that shit. Thank God. Meetings. Y'all got meetings. No, won't. That's not true, actually. I think I have a meeting. Fuck, I think I have to go to a meeting right now. But I can't. Except I can't because I don't have email login. Shit. All right, everybody. That's it. We're going to end this right now. I hope everyone has a good holiday. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Kato. Thank you, Mello, for letting us use the track. Waypoint holiday song. Until the new year, as always, fuck capitalism, go home. We're sending your holiday love and cheer. Bye.
What I'm regularly told.
We'll be doing it at 9 o'clock your time, 10 o'clock my time, etc. I was like, no, Patrick, get it backwards. And I was like, we're doing this at 10.
I wish that we were doing it at 10, but we're not. We're doing it at 9.
That's Patrick's snaked his way to being in charge of Game of the Year way. Whoops, we're here an hour early. Are we here 15 minutes late? Yes, but in reality, we're here 45 minutes early. If you think about it from my perspective.
Oh man,
owned.
Damn.
Oof.
Wow.
Owned.
Mike sounds a little hot, Austin.
That sounds right.
I was up late watching that movie about the Chicago guys.
You finished it before the Game Awards, though.
Just a bunch of
The
gangster
Chicago
movies.
guys.
I was sleepy.
Hey,
The Chicago guys.
that's how a Chicago guy
Was it
sounds.
a movie so bad that it forced you immediately to go to sleep,
Yes,
Rob Backney?
I was like, well, time for bed.
It really had the same reaction for me, man. That final circular pan of the courtroom really takes a lot out of you.
Oh my god.
The end of the movie, they circumcised the end of the movie
names, right?
by reading all the names of the Vietnam people who died, and then everyone gives them a standing ovation because everyone respects the troops, even the FBI.
Yeah, if you hadn't understood what was happening in this final scene as they read the names, Joseph Gordon-Levitt turns to his Department of Justice handler and is like, "Show respect for the fallen." And I was like, "Kill me." It
hurt. It hurt to watch. It was not very good. I didn't like it very much.
But
anyway, petition to change our theme song to a cover of TV Party Tonight, except it's Podcast Party Tonight. Or Podcast Party Today.
Today. Are we using the mellow Christmas music, holiday music again?
yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't you send us fixed ones?
No, that was a joke.
Did you not listen to
I didn't
that?
actually click it. I didn't click it.
It's
should
him
go click
gassing
it.
up Umurangi.
It's
very
very
funny.
good.
Okay,
It's very good.
All right.
This time I have Time That Is open.
Oh, that's a good idea. I do not. There we go.
So, my dog is...
Was that 9 a.m. energy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Rob,
Ellen's definitely
TV reflection dog is here again, and that bitch has got to be kept in line, and Mina's on it.
Wow.
All right. I'm recording. Ready to clap?
I am also recording, and I got to open up a whole bunch of documents so I know what the freak we're doing today.
Starting on hot takes, right?
International Mountain Day.
Oh, also I
International
made a thing. Hold on. I made a fucking drive.
Oh, thank God.
I
Just
would
drop
love
shit
a
in
Google
there.
Drive.
He did it. He did it after 3 short years. 2 short, whatever.
I don't know why I didn't think of this.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Here, just bookmark that, and then all you have to do is drag your file into the appropriate folder for the episode we're
Oh, I love
recording.
I love this.
I love this for us.
I've already made folders for everything today. And
Some real 9 a.m. energy in this video call.
Yeah.
I gotta say.
I'm
sorting it all
getting
out.
ready to fake it. You know what I mean? I want to be as low.
You got to take it down to a negative level, basically.
Exactly.
So you can burst back up. Yeah.
I've already watched 45 minutes of 101 Dalmatians, baby. Let's go.
what?
What's that mean?
Excuse me?
I watched 40 minutes of 101 That's not like a euphemism. That's
I thought it was like a thing. I thought you were like,
Yeah.
hey guys, we're doing 45 minutes of 101 Dalmatians. Let's
gonna do
go.
we're gonna do
I was
10
like, shit, I
burpees.
love 45 minutes of 101 Dalmatians. That's my favorite game. Honey, we're doing 45 minutes, 101 Dalmatians. It's lit.
Bring my custom set.
On the second day of Hanukkah,
Yeah. God.
Bruh.
All right.
I love this.
Oh my
Happy
God.
Hanukkah, folks.
Yeah. Happy Hanukkah. God. Are we? So this will be coming out on the 20. What?
Something.
Well, how many podcasts
are we
are
doing
we
this the
actually
week of
producing?
Christmas, like 21st through 25th, or do we want to spread them out? Through to New Year's.
That's the well.
Because
I say we record, see how long they are, and then we can like
spread them.
I will not give dates in these then.
No.
Okay.
So I would
Don't
say the
worry.
holidays because we don't
like if we don't know.
Like if we want to split up the release schedule one, we can. If we want to just do it as one, I mean, you know what I mean.
We'll see
like
how it is. Yeah,
we'll see how we feel about it.
Sounds good. Let's clap. Let's do 35.
Oh, shit. I got it.
No, are you sure?
It was on the 35.
Okay,
She nailed it.
Okay.
I believe.
Okay.
I nailed it yesterday
strong
too.
confidence. I nailed it. I believe.